So thank you everybody for joining. This is our Emergency Services Professional Development Series. And tonight we will be covering um, building training and exercise plans. And this is our second session. Get the slides up here. All right. So developing training and exercise plans. This is our second session of our 4-week series focusing on this particular topic. The last session, or session 1, was overview intent. We looked at, why do we need to create education or training and exercise plans? What's the difference between training and exercise, or training events and exercise events, and where to pull your requirements for both. And today we are going to dive more in depth on training events in general. So remember, training is developing skills and processes. Exercises is evaluating your proficiency at those skills. So, and it's mission focused or task focused. And then you can see the additional courses coming up in future weeks. We'll discuss exercise design, and then importance of evaluation after action reports, and what goes into those specifically, because those are very, very, very important. So training design is this week's topic. What we're going to cover are skills, task, performance, derive the importance of looking at those skills and tasks. How do you conduct a training event? So how do you actually teach it or demonstrate the skills that you want emulated by the students? We're going to discuss, why training is individual and team focused. And then, of course, all of this is based on, your commander's intent or the missions assigned to your organization. So if it's missions assigned to your local region, your local squadron, your wing, that is going to direct your focus on all of these. So training design, skill and task performance drive. So when you conduct training, it's the individual actions that you want to be accomplished. So there's a big difference between training and education. In a training event, we need to ensure that we are doing both. So we can train a dog to sit, or we can train a monkey to use a hammer to drive a nail into a piece of wood. We're teaching them the mechanical skill set to perform that task. The dog or the monkey doesn't understand why they're sitting or why they are driving the nail into the wood, and what are the repercussions of doing it incorrectly. What's the benefit of doing it more efficiently? That's where the education piece is, that the primary, secondary, and tertiary effects on the mission or onto the team's performance. That is education. Performing the step-by-step skills, that is training. Where we start out is our SQTRs is obviously our starting point for emergency services. But that is the bare minimum. So if we're looking at a mission radio operator, they go through their SQTR. Okay, they're understanding how to put a radio together. They're learning how to talk on the radio. They're learning how to collect the message traffic and relay that information on to the people that require it. But where's the education piece? Are we explaining some of the wave propagation fundamentals? Are we explaining to them some fundamentals of digital logic? So if we're having them send message traffic and the message traffic is becoming unreadable, or the end station isn't receiving it, do they understand enough of the physics side of operating the radio that they can then, check their equipment, understand what issues can cause, reduction in decibels or their data to drop out? Is there something affecting the wavelength propagation or interfering with those wavelengths? Same with the search team. They, your ground team 3 members, they understand how to do a search line, but do they really understand the purpose of critical spacing, like going out into the woods, into that particular environment, and trying to look at a known item and understanding it's not just when you can see, say, I put a red cap out into the um, foliage on the ground. I don't want them to say, yep, I can see the red cap from 15 feet away. They need to understand that education piece where it's not when you can notice something red on the ground. When can you actually identify that item? It may only be 6 feet away. And that's important because, especially if you're looking for a person that may be unconscious or small, or worst case scenario, they have deceased, they're not going to look like a person. So it's not looking in the woods for a blue t-shirt, it's looking for a version of a blue t-shirt or a blue material. And how close do you have to be to actually say, oh, that is blue cotton versus, oh, that is a blue, say, plastic tarp. So that's where the education piece comes in. The individual actions to accomplish are also going to be unit, region, or platform specific. So when we're talking platform specific, if it's a SUAS, okay, what SUAS? Is it a SkyDO2 Plus? Is it a Antifa Parrot? Is it DJI? And then what sensors are on that platform? So you need to know how the controller operates, basic flying fundamentals. Like if I push up on the left joystick, what happens to my platform? If I push down, that's, those individual actions, performance techniques. And then how to control the sensor in a way that you achieve what the customer's objectives are. So it's much more than just taking a picture or taking a video. Like, what does the customer want? Do they need to identify specific damage? Do they need to find an individual? Or are they looking for cracks in infrastructure? How you then deploy that asset is going to be specifically associated to the requirements of the customer. So me just doing a really quick mapping scan, pre-programmed mission over a wooded area to look for an individual, that's probably not going to work. Yeah, I can probably go back and have somebody analyze the imagery later on a computer with more fidelity and better resolution. But if I flew that mission at 400 feet elevation in a densely populated forest area, and it's in the middle of the summer, so there's a lot of green foliage, then you wasted a mission because you're not going to get the resolution. You're not going to get that fine detail to see through the canopy to achieve the customer's expectations, why they assigned you that mission. We also need to develop, and going into this, what we've been talking about, this is where operating standards or operating instructions, there are many different words. There are desktop procedures, standard operating procedures. Hold on, somebody's entering in. There we go. You can have some organizations call them playbooks, but you need to develop written instructions to perform the desired task that you want achieved. And these need to be continuously refined. So you can have standard operating procedures, instructions, playbooks, whatever, for different types of missions. So if you are an air crew and you're flying a particular search pattern, then you could have specific procedures identified for that particular type of search pattern. So if you're doing like a, sunflower shaped search pattern, then there are certain things that the aircrew must perform in a certain fashion to achieve that high success at that mission. Same with mission staff assistants or anybody working in an incident management team. We definitely need to have desktop procedures on checking in resources or passing communications traffic, keeping a logbook, how to set up, a radio net, or ground teams. Like, you should have your standard operating procedures, or if you got called out, what equipment do you like? What are the steps? I need to, sign into the Wing website, place my availability. If I get activated, okay, what gear do I absolutely need to, ensure that I have? Do I have the proper uniform items? What do I do once I'm activated? Do I need to text somebody? Do I need to call somebody? When I get to the meeting point, what are the things I need to do? So prepare our radios, prepare the vehicle, potentially get the ELT equipment, so get extra compasses. There's a lot of things that we put in the SQTRs and sort of expect these individuals that become ground team members or radio operators or UAS or UAS aircrew or fixed wing aircrew. We expect them to be able to perform these tasks, but we don't have desktop procedures for when they start performing that task to guide them through success. And it needs to be specific to each team and specific probably to different scenarios. That's why a lot of people call them like playbooks, just like a sports team. They bust out the playbook. Okay, we're, it's the final 30 seconds of the game. We're down by 6. Then, with the highest probability of scoring, we need to look at scoring to win. We need to look at these plays. Or if our goal is to tie it and go into overtime, then, to increase our probability, we probably need to look at these plays. And then they make their most educated decision on which best play to use to achieve that stated goal. That's the same thing that we have to do for our emergency services teams. We should have those procedures written out for those, particular missions. So if our ground team gets slated to support a pointer distribution site, okay, what does the ground team need their 24, 72-hour pack? Probably not. Maybe they do. Maybe the facility that they're going to be handing out supplies is running off generator power, and it's a situation where, we deploy Virginia Wing personnel or Wing personnel to another state, and they're going to be living out of a tent. Do they probably need their 72-hour pack? Yep. Do they need specifically search related, like search and rescue related equipment in that 72-hour pack? No, but their bivouac, their hygiene, their clothing, extra PPE, so extra gloves, potentially masks, sunblock, bug repellent, things like that. And that, instead of trying to guess and explain that to each individual, you could be like, hey, review this. So our standard operating procedure or our playbook for this is going to give you the guidelines for these events. Now, these don't have to be developed all at one time. It's a lot of work. That goes back to that second bullet. They're continuously going through refinement. So you can get a basic draft. You take it to a training event. You train your team in that playbook or that standard operating procedure, and then you find out, okay, this didn't work, or we missed a couple steps. You go in and you update it. Then if you have a real mission or an exercise where you assign a mission to your team and they just get the exercises where they're going out and just performing as if it was a real mission, and you have evaluators sitting there, monitoring how they're performing their assigned task, those after action reports or evaluation reports come back and be like, okay, they had a real hiccup here because they followed the playbook, they knocked everything out, but then they didn't know what to do in, situation X, or they didn't have this equipment on them. So that requires us to go back and update that playbook. And ultimately, training, when it's skill and task performance drive, it ultimately you have to be masters at the basics. So we shouldn't be, once we certify somebody as being able to perform that skill set, we shouldn't need to be retraining them on those basic skills. We need to then start introducing them to more advanced concepts of those skills. How does this integrate into a larger team or a larger complex? Or how do we build on those skills with new technology or new equipment? But it all starts at a master at the basics. So if we're not good at the simplest task, we're definitely not going to be good when you put us in a team organization, and then we have to perform those tasks. And depending on what type of team you're thrown in, not being good at the basics, like, you don't want a pilot that's not good at the basics of flying, because disastrous outcomes. You don't want somebody driving a van if they're a bad driver. That they can't do the basic, like, stop at a stop sign or use a turn signal or not speed. So those are the things that we need to ensure that we're driving home in the training events, and then continuously evaluating our individual's performance afterwards. Okay. Now, when it comes to the actual training portion, I like this model of see it, do it, teach it. It's great for adult learning. It's what I use teaching university classes or in the military, teaching skills, no matter if it was from the Marine Corps martial arts program to rifle marksmanship. You see it as a student, then, it's taught to you, then you do that skill, you actually perform it, and then you put those individuals in a group, or you assign an individual to then turn around and teach that skill back. Because when you have them teach that skill back to either newer individuals or to a group of their peers, or even teach it back to a group of instructors, you're going to immediately identify their level of comprehension of not just the physical skill sets, but of that education piece too. Like, why are you doing this task this particular way? What is the outcome that you're trying to achieve? So we need to make sure we provide congruent and standardized instruction, so we're training all of our members in those basics the same way across the board, because that's going to allow our members across the wing or across the region or across Civil Air Patrol to be able to better integrate into more comprehensive teams and be able to perform those basic skill sets. And then the biggest goal is teach for comprehension. Again, I can train that monkey to hit a hammer or hit a nail with a hammer, but our members aren't monkeys. So we need to ensure that all of our students, especially our cadets, they need to understand why they're performing those tasks. What are the primary, secondary, and tertiary effects that we're expecting from them performing that task? Or what will happen when they perform that task well in a team or crew setting? So how is that going to affect the other members and the missions that they are trying to perform, or tasks that they're trying to perform? Or what is the effect if they do it poorly on the rest of the team or the rest of the air crew? We need to make sure that our instructors, the ones that we're teaching, they can actually proficiently demonstrate the skill or the task. Now, this is something that I've started noticing, and I'm sure everybody else does, that within Civil Air Patrol, we have, um, I'll call them uh, merit badge winners or collectors or skill collectors. They want to beef up their 101 card, but they'll go through the training just to have a better looking 101 card, but when it comes down to actually performing the task, they can't, or they're definitely not proficient at it. So that's a leadership challenge of us actually looking at individuals and being like, hey, like yes, you've completed all of the requirements for the training. You did the minimum that the Civil Air Patrol asks of you. But I'm going to tell you right now, if you sign up for a mission, I'm not going to authorize you to go out until you get more proficient at those basics. Because at that point, they become a liability, or they are just trying to collect the skill and, to look good on paper, which for me, I don't understand that in a volunteer organization like this, because it's not going to get you paid anymore. Your promotion's not going to get any, you're not going to get a better job from having it. So I don't know why people do that, really. So you want individuals to practice this stuff, and it could be something as simple as, hey, like, I want, every time we have a meeting, I want you to demonstrate this skill to me. Either show up with your compass, and each time before the meeting starts, I'm just going to give you some azimuths and pace counts or distances to random objects, at our meeting location. I want you to be able to, accurately shoot that azimuth and walk that pace count. Does it require more effort from our part? Yes, but I mean, that's leadership. I never understood the saying, rank has its privileges, because in the military, it always seemed the more rank you get, the more responsibility you get and the less free time you have, because there's all these things that you have to ensure that you're taking care of, especially when you're talking about the training and education or the morale and welfare of your troops. That takes extra attention from us to do that. And then again, when we circle back here to students, teach back the principles and skills, we need to make sure when they do teach that skill back, that they're performing it properly. Again, we're checking not just for the physical skill set, but for comprehension of why they're performing that skill in the stated standard method that was taught to them. But we need to make sure that maybe they comprehend it, but that they have an issue performing it. So land nav is one of those items that needs a lot of performance to get it right. People who can understand, left add, right subtract, calculating the offset angles for the declination diagram. They can understand the academic portion of it, explain to you why they're doing it, write it out perfectly in the classroom. Then you put them out in the woods or into a wilderness situation, hand them the compass, they can't perform the actual task because they don't have enough practice. So we need to ensure that we're giving our individuals enough time to perform the skills with supervision, with guidance, to be able to perform the task at hand to the standard that we expect. And then this is a big one that we don't do often. We need to continuously change the conditions that the skills and tasks are performed. So if I'm teaching land navigation and we only set up the land nav course, say at Prince William Forest Park in the wintertime, that means all the experience of the students that keep coming to these, or the Civil Air Patrol members that keep coming to these training events, is doing land navigation on barren trees with, a lot of fall foliage or dead foliage on the ground and low temperatures. And you start building training scars. So when it comes to real world application of that skill, and you throw them out and that say that even the same forest out in Prince William Forest Park in the middle of summer, where you have 5 or 6 feet of visibility and dense foliage, like green foliage on the trees. It's hot, it's humid, maybe raining. They're not going to be able to perform those tasks as well because during the training, we didn't change up the conditions that the skill sets are performed in. And this is true across all the emergency services situations. Maybe we need high stress or time-based performance. So you have restricted time, or maybe you have tons of time, but it's in bad weather. So it's you want to change up the environmental conditions and then the time associated to performance of those skills to replicate different type of real world mission scenarios. When we're looking at individual and team focused, when we're doing the skills evaluation, it's sort of important that we don't do, and this is specific to Civil Air Patrol, that we try to avoid large group sign-offs of some of the basic skills. Like if it is an individual perform, say, setting up a shelter, then we shouldn't have 40 people out there. They all set up a shelter and we're like, yep, good. Yeah, it looks like everybody puts something up. And one person just says, yes, everybody's complete. If we're going to have large groups, then we need to have a large amount of evaluators to ensure that we're giving each individual the attention and the focus on those skills to make sure that they comprehend and can perform the skills to the standard. And this is where I definitely see us falling short sometimes, because even during the regional SAR college this summer, I had individuals that were working on some more advanced ground team skills. They had the qualifications, but they showed up and we're reviewing some basic skills like map reading, and they can't read a map or they can't read a compass. Why? Because they got signed off in a large group setting where they were able to hide out, and everybody that attended, as long as it looked like you were doing something, got credit for the training. And so we need to make sure that as instructors or evaluators or in a leadership position, maybe you're not actually doing the training, but you're overseeing the organization of the training event. You have to be walking around and looking at all the students, and you can pretty easily identify those that are the wallflowers. They're hiding out, they're letting everybody else do the work, and then they're eventually going to try, to take credit for doing that training. We have to call them out, and especially in emergency services, I'm one of those people that if you want to do this type of work, then you need to have a little bit thicker skin. So they need to be able to be okay with getting called out in front of the group and be like, okay, please demonstrate the skill for everybody else. Because if you're on a search and rescue team, you can't be timid, you can't be shy, you're not, and you definitely can't be inefficient or unknowing or ignorant on how to do the skill, because now you're endangering the safety of especially you if you can't perform the task, but the rest of the team, and then ultimately you're risking the success of the mission. And when somebody's life is hanging in the balance, that's sort of one of those risks or one of those responsibilities that you don't want to take, is taking an individual out that is not necessarily proficient at the skill set when there's more on the line. They need to be evaluated and trained beforehand. And then you want to reiterate how this skill affects the overall team. So if you're on a UAS or fixed wing aircrew team or incident management team, if you're training a ground branch director, they need to understand that their inability to coordinate and track their ground team members and communicate with the rest of the incident management team may put other assets at risk. So you may be putting fixed wing aircraft at risk because they have to loiter on the search area a little bit longer, waiting for the ground team to show up, and pushing closer and closer to that fuel point where they have to end mission and return home. And this is true across all of the emergency services skill sets. You have to understand how your performance affects the bigger mission and all of those other duty assignments around you and teams around you, because none of us work in a vacuum. We're all working towards common goals, but there may be multiple objectives trying to be achieved at the same time. And the objective you were assigned or your team is assigned directly impacts the ability of another team or another specialty to accomplish their mission. There are some skills, like basic skills, that need to be trained at a team or overall task level. So if you think of a litter carry, yet that is not an every individual must understand how to perform the litter carry and how to package a patient and how to put all of it together. But you can't perform that task individually. That's one of those more complex skill sets that is a basic task, but it's a team-based task. Same with like communications or mission planning, mission briefing for air crew. Those are team tasks that have to be performed to a particular standard, because one individual can't perform all of the steps to achieve those goals. And some of that is our familiarization and preparatory training, but there are some very basic tasks later on in a lot of the SQTRs that are team or function oriented, that still need to be performed at a standard, but you have to have a group to do that. So like a ground team leader controlling a search line. If you only have 1 to 2 people out there, then that's really not a search line. They're not learning that skill set required. You want to throw like 8 people out there, have a navigator, have your mission radio operator, have a flank people assigned as flankers and markers, and give them an area to cover and walk them through the different steps. Like, okay, here's how you do whistle calls. Here's how you do voice calls. Here's how you get your team's critical spacing. And walk them step by step. Have them practice that, movement through different types of terrain. Have them do an open grass field. Have them go through dense vegetation. Have them move through something that is full of, Virginia creeper and mountain laurel. But then you have them train in different environments. Then later down the road, after they've had practice with this, then you give them a mission during an exercise, and you send some evaluators out, and you just give the ground team leader their search objectives, and then you let them go out and figure out how to take all those individual skills and the different scenarios in which they experience performing those skills. And now how do they make that command decision on, okay, this is how we're employing the search line. Here's everybody's functions. And here's how I'm going to control you through that particular environment. And in order to meet the objectives, either by covering a particular area, a certain amount of acreage, or searching this area to a certain level of fidelity within a restricted time period. But they should have enough training events under their belt to be able to actually perform that skill during an exercise. And so here's how we, during our last session, we talked about mission essential task list. That's where you receive the types of missions and the minimum performance standards that you must be able to achieve from your higher headquarters. And then you break that down. This is more a graphic look at it. So we take our commander's intent based on the mission assigned. And then that we figure out how we perform those standards or those skills based on our policy. So we have regulations, standards, and task guides that guide us on the types of skills and how we perform the skills and in what settings we have to perform those skills and under what restrictions. Then you continue to break that down and you look at your mission essential tasks list. So what are the teams, what are the types of mission and objectives the teams need to be able to achieve? The individual, what type of integration do you have to be able to maintain? So ground to air communication or integration, or all of the elements using their communications equipment correctly and keeping the incident management team and the incident commander informed of their progress with regular check-ins. Those all fall under our mission essential tasks. Then when we're building a training event, this is where we take those tasks that we've been assigned and we understand to what level of satisfaction must be achieved based on the mission and policy guidance. And now we start changing up the conditions in which we build our training events. So we're going to look at different weather types, performance in the cold, the individual task. So that's why it breaks it down here. So we're looking at, say, a team task or something super easy. We'll look at, super easy to explain, we'll look at performing a litter carry. Okay, performing a litter carry in hot summer, dry heat. Perform litter carry, hot, humid weather. Perform litter carry in torrential downpour. Perform litter carry in sub-freezing temperatures. Perform litter carry in snow. We also want to change up day or night. So that day or night or at twilight periods has a huge effect, especially if we're talking communications, search and rescue objectives. How the target and the target environment appears is drastically different between peak daylight, peak night, and then those twilight or thermal crossover periods. So you want to train in those different type of environments because your ability to perform certain skill sets are going to be drastically changed at those day-night times. And especially if you do different types of environments in different day-night situations. And then time. So do you want it time restrictive, unlimited time? You want to change the time-based matrix or the time-based conditions, so that way they understand, what is the fidelity we can perform this task if we have to do a litter carry, unrestricted time, but we have to move over a mile in wooded terrain. Okay, they're going to be able to take more rest. They can pick better routes. Maybe they don't have to use any cribbing or any ropes to move the patient, and they can make it as low stress on the litter team as possible. Because unlimited time, they can take breaks. Maybe the individual that they are carrying out just had some severe heat exhaustion. They're doing well, but we still need to get them out of the environment. Then give them the same type, all the other conditions, but say, hey, this person has to get out of the wilderness. You have to make this mile in 45 minutes or your person's not going to survive. Or the window closes to have a helo evacuating them out. So you are under a time restriction, 45 minutes. That's going to drastically change how that litter team is going to move across the terrain, what routes they pick. They may have to divide people up to set up, some rope and pulley systems in advance of the team getting there to expedite the extraction. And then you have a reserve team in the back that's picking up that equipment and then racing ahead. And you have to do this cycling motion of your team, but they all need to know what those responsibilities are and understand how to perform that in that restricted or condensed time frame. And then in disaster scenarios, so if we look at performing skills in a disaster condition, then how's that going to affect how we perform? So limited power, isolated location, limited equipment. And then we're going to put different evaluation criteria on each of these conditions. So if we break down the disaster condition, then we can evaluate if teams have no power. How can they perform their task? What steps do they need to take to overcome not having power? So, or not having comms, having power. So unlimited power or house power, whatever it is. Always evaluate them, even if they are giving unlimited time or restricted or condensed time. What is the timeliness of the performing within that restraint? So you give them an endless amount of time. They have to move a mile over, rough wooded terrain, but they still evac a patient in 30 minutes. Or another team equally capable, same patient criticality, same patient height weight, because the patient's height weight or the weight definitely affects how the team performs. But that other team takes 2.5 hours to do it. Okay, so timeliness, yes, team one that did it in a half an hour got them out in a half an hour, but they are so exhausted, beat up, and worn down that they cannot go back out for another mission today. They're done. But the other team, they need a couple hours rest, refit, replenish, repair, and then they're ready to go for another search mission. So you have to do the evaluation. Knowledge, and this isn't just technical knowledge of the skills that they're performing, but this is overall like adaptability. It sort of ties into that adaptability block there. But do they have enough trade specific or skill specific knowledge that if they come across an issue or a barrier, they're able to quickly adapt and be able to still achieve the task just in a different method, or employing the equipment in a still safe, but a different method that's still effective. Or, if you have members on your team that just know the buttonology, or they only know how to perform the skill and they don't understand why they're performing that skill, that's another evaluation criteria. Like, yes, you performed the litter carry well, you didn't give up, you held on, but I could tell that you were lost when we're rotating the patient around, when we're going uphill to keep the head uphill, or what other knowledge specific criteria there are for performing that task. They may know how to perform it, but they don't know why they're performing it and what's the effects. So they don't know, oh, you're supposed to keep the head up. So if you drop the patient, you don't drop them on head downhill, cause additional injury, or maybe because they suffered a head injury, we're trying to keep the brain elevated above the heart. Whatever the reasoning is behind the reason why you're doing that or performing that particular task, the team members, individuals need to know that background knowledge. So I know this looks a little complicated, but this is how we need to think through our training events when we put some type of training together. We don't want individuals just to show up and be like, okay, put the radio together. Like that they did that during the ICUT. They put the a radio together during that evaluation. When we're training them to do an emergency services qualification, we need to ensure that we're walking them through the skill, the background knowledge, the performance steps, why the performance steps are the way they are, and then what is the effect of them performing either poorly or proficiently the steps of the required skill. And then ensuring that the reason why we're having them do this training is tied back to the mission essential task list, or those minimum objectives that we have to be able to achieve. And we're creating training conditions that are different each time that these students come out to learn. And so this way their knowledge and their capability continues to grow, and they become a more efficient emergency services individual. All right. Any questions at this time? If you're viewing this at a later date and watching this online, if you have questions, definitely leave it in the comment section below. I would definitely like all of our individuals to start engaging and having communications, sharing ideas around these topics, because that's how we're going to get better. But anybody in person, if you have questions, go ahead and bring them up if you have them. Nope, no questions. All right. So again, we went over training design this week. That in approximately 4 weeks, I have to look at the schedule when the next session 3 is going to take place, because I know in the middle of September, we have a special presentation that we're trying to get. I would like to have as many people online and participating on September 16th. Of course, that's a Friday from 18 to 1900 Eastern Standard Time. We are having the executive director of the National Association for Search and Rescue, Mr. Chris Boyer. He will be giving a presentation, so we definitely want to make him feel welcome. Giving a presentation to Civil Air Patrol, so we can share that link out to any wing, anybody that wants to attend. The only restriction is we cannot share the spreadsheet. That's a permissions issue with our Teams account. But any of the links within the spreadsheet, we can share out. So the exercise design session 3, it will be a little bit later, but I'll figure out what that is.